Uh, Restart recording. Hi everyone, we're about to start. Elliot is going up first with his tips. That would help. There we go. Where are we?
All right, so hi everyone. So I actually started using Tableau not so long ago, so I didn't really use Tableau for a long time. So I decided to focus my tips mostly on just kind of, I guess, more basic, but I guess quite functional little tips, which when I first came across them, I was quite blown away that I could do this, and I thought it was quite practical. So first, I just wanted to show how to make a top-end filter, but which is user sorted, so dynamic. So in order to do that, here we have data about just different customers and the sum of profit on the right, but we would like to filter this to get maybe the top 10 most profitable customers. So of course, we could just use the sort function here and just kind of count down. But let's say we just want to show 20 or 30 customers. We could go into the filters pane, just dragging the customer name. Boom. So filter share, so the filter shelf, create a top condition, filter by field, and then choose a number. But that wouldn't be letting the user select this. So the way to do this is, instead of selecting any measure, you can just create a new parameter. It opens the parameter window pane. So here, we're just going to call this maybe just something quite simple. So just choose a number of customers to filter by. And we're going to leave it as an integer. We can leave it the current value at 10. And in terms of range, we maybe don't want to give the opportunity of everybody to select just the whole range because they'd never be able to see it. So maybe we're just going to limit it to maybe 20 or 25. And once we've selected this, we can then rather easily just kind of dynamically let the user choose how many people to filter by to get an effective just filter. So I thought this was quite a little handy thing at first when I first came across it, so I appreciated it quite strongly when I got this one. So the second tip that I came across, here we just have a map, and we have the sum of sales on size. So we're just looking at maybe how across the map has sales been spread. And if we add a little bit of level of detail, we can still start seeing how things spread out. However, when we start zooming in areas using the Tableau interface originally, we realize that we don't get much information. So there's a neat little function in Tableau once you've played around with it, but if you don't know about it, it's quite hard to find it, and you possibly don't know that it exists. But there's a map layer function, and when we select the map layers, we can edit what we can show. So this is quite convenient if, for instance, we added postal code here, but if we just want to start show the streets, for instance, where they are relative, and we can also show the name of the places to get a better idea of putting a name on where most of these sales happen by postcode, which I thought was quite a convenient little addition. I had no idea I could do this until very recently. An additional neat function is to be able to add a layer of data without having to blend or just kind of merge data sets about maybe income per household or such population data, because Tableau allows you to add map layers. Now, I don't know if this can be done with anything other than the US for now, but I feel that there's probably a functionality where you can maybe add different data sets to the map layers.
This particular one is US only.
Yeah, okay, fair. But you can add some map data and kind of get an idea of maybe just different metrics and how that relates without having to do complicated joins for that, to get just a quick estimate of what, I guess, in those regions, certain characteristics that you've chosen look like. And you can filter by state, but also by postcode, by other different levels. So that was my second tip. Now, staying on the topic of maps, my third map is also trying to show essentially data across, let's say, the United States in this case. So I could, of course, drag the sales to the map and display how sales have varied across space in the United States, across maybe the years we're looking at. And I could also look at profits and drag it to color and then show how profit has changed. However, if I want to give the user the flexibility of being able to flick through these two metrics without having to each time drag and drop things and just make an interactive dashboard where people can just select, we can filter that so that we can create a parameter and a case where we're going to be able to essentially let the user choose the filter they want to apply to the map. So in order to do that, we're first going to create a parameter, which can be found next to dimension in a little arrow. And we're going to call it choose the metric to display. Now, we're going to make this just an integer, and we're going to go onto the list function here. So we're going to create, we're going to give a value of 1 and 2 because we are trying to look at profits, and 1, we're going to display it as profits, and 2, we're going to display it as sales. Now, once we've created this, this creates a parameter which will allow us to essentially flick between two different metrics on a map. However, we still need to apply a calculation for this. So creating a calculation, we're just going to use this and just call this maybe map display. And we're going to use a function which is quite handy, just called a case function. And so here we're just going to put in essentially the parameter we just created, which was choose the metric to display. So we're going to call it when equal 1, and when we said equal 1, we're trying to display profit. Then, since we're trying to display profit here, we're just going to call it. So we're just going to ask it that when the value selected is 1, then display the sum of profit here. And when the value is equal to 2, we're going to display the sum of sales. Now, if we just simply drag this new metric that we created onto color, and we choose to display the parameter, we can now easily just switch between the two and show how the sales and the profit have varied without having to get people to drag it on and off, which I think is quite a neat metric. And it's important to note that you can do this for as many values as you want, and it's just as simple to be able to flick between these different metrics. The last tip that I have, which is one that actually, talking to different people, is quite a simple one, but it's one that maybe a lot of people haven't noticed. And I think that it's a very useful one when you're using different calculations. So here, we've essentially created a calculation which displays the average discount times the profit ratio. However, the profit ratio is a second calculation that we've already created. And so we don't necessarily know what's inside of this. So if you just expand this little arrow, and then you mouse over the profit ratio and just click on it, on the right here, it displays actually the equation of the variable that you created, and this works for any complicated, any length. So it's quite useful just to see if you're using the right metric, because we all know that Tableau boards can get quite crowded with different metrics and different measures, dimensions, because you create some all the time, you display them. So it's quite useful to be able to kind of very quickly and very neatly see what's included in the metric that you've included in your display, just so that you can just check that you're using the right metric to divide things by. And my last tip essentially is from Alteryx. And so I've been able to appreciate essentially Alteryx for its power to be able to clean and present data and how it's quite effective. And so I was going to talk about two of my favorite tools that I've been using so far, actually three in this case, the text to column tool, the multi-row tool, and the selection tool. Now, the reason for why I appreciate the text to column is that this is something that I had always wanted to know and always wanted to do when I used any Excel files. So let's say you have a range that's condensed to one field, or a series of string that's built into the same value. However, you want to be able to split them up. So I tried to do this on Excel, and I wasn't really good at Excel. I was never really good at Excel. And so when I came across Alteryx, I was quite baffled that there was a function that was as simple as just using a specific delimiter to be able to break down into separate columns. And so using the text to column tool, you're able to, in this case, we have an example where we have postal ranges for different sales representatives, and they cover just a different range of postal codes across the country. And we just want to break it down and essentially get all the individual postcode zones so that we can match them to individual postcodes of sales by customers. So what happens here, since we have the range, we can just use a text column to be able to break it down into the start and the finish of the postal range for each person. And then we can just use my next tool that I'm going to talk about, which I think is very, very neat and very fantastic in Alteryx, and is the capacity of the multi-row tool to be able to just generate rows for each input. And so in this case, we're just trying to essentially fill out for every single row in the range, every single row in between. So if we just run through this formula, we're just trying to essentially fill out all these gaps. And running this simple equation, which, I mean, I could walk through step by step, but the idea is just filling in these gaps. And yeah, we're able to just draw out essentially and generate all the missing rows between the range of data that we're looking for so that we can easily match and create some matching data across our data set. And last but not least, I think, is the select tool. Now, the reason for why I appreciate the select tool is that I appreciate when things are quite clear and quite neat. And in Excel, to kind of edit and remove fields, it's a bit clunky. Whereas here, you get a very neat interface, which allows you to kind of change between the types of the different fields that you're using, including allowing you to show them further along in the dashboard. And so what that means is that essentially, if you do this quite regularly across the dashboard and eliminate fields as you go along, you're able to get a result which is very clear and neat, in this case, which is just organizing by region and by sales rep, and for each customer ID and whether or not they responded. Now, this is we have about 2,678 rows displayed, and it's a very neat column. If we didn't follow this practice and we didn't close the rows and we did a lot of joins and a lot of text columns and all this stuff, we end up with a file that looks something like this, and that while it's the same number of rows and answers pretty much the exact same question, it's actually quite hard to find in the data that you want what you're looking for, and it's not very clear and concise. And so if you use the select tool effectively, you can then just drag and drop this into Tableau, for instance, and get some very easy mapping along the way to kind of just display this. Now, imagine you had a field on Tableau that was matching regions to a specific country that you had. You can very easily show exactly where the customers are located in which region, and this would be quite a lot harder if you hadn't cleaned your data. So yeah, so this is my series of tips. As I said, they will try to focus on maybe just simpler, more basic tips of people who just started using these softwares. But I thought that they were all quite useful and quite handy, and they really helped me just kind of essentially become quicker and better at just yeah, learning the software. So yeah, thank you.
With your case statement, you can also use an if statement as well.
Yeah.
You do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, next up, we have David.
That's me.
Marcus's favourite too.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just weird that you don't.
So Marcus has learned something new today as well.
Clear my mind.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David. Third week of the data school, deep week. I'm going to show my 5 tips of the week. 3 of them are mostly formatting, and one is one tip that we have seen being used probably since day one, but I didn't know it was built into Tableau. I thought it was something from elsewhere. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about nulls and booleans. So for the first 3 tips, I'm going to use this dashboard, or this dataset that comes from Makeover Monday of this week. And right now, I'm going to recreate this block right on the left bottom that is showing drivers that are consistently going doing a qualification result, race result. So which players are doing usually better at racing, at qualifying, and the other one. And I'm doing that using sets. So I have a couple of sets. One for those that are performing better, another that performs worse. I can add both of them to the detail of the view, and now add them to color. And we have them now in the view. Those that perform better in dark blue, those that perform worse in light blue. The legend is a bit very misleading. It's not very informative. So an alternative way is to create a calculated field that will essentially mimic what this field, what these sets are doing. If we go to set the definition, in this case they are defined by a condition, and this is the second tip that you can do actually control in any of these windows. I thought that this was something that you need a different program, something else, but you can do in any place that you have a formula, even a condition. If you take top formula here, you can any of these places you can focus on and make the screen larger, which I didn't know before. So going back to the set, if we copy this condition and we go, I created a calculated field called performance that has both conditions, the condition of the first set here on the bottom and the condition of the second set. So if we replace now these sets with this new measure, we have the same result, but the label is neat and actually it's informative. The other tip is, imagine that we are working still with this data set. We have that dashboard, but now we want to add a map. And we have this. For some reason, let's say because we want to keep on with the theme, or because it's just some corporate decision, or just because we can change how this display, the search display on the map looks like. So if we close Tableau, go to our Tableau workbook, we can edit this Tableau workbook with Notepad or whichever text editor and copy your preferences for display on the map. And in the preference sections of your workbook, same way when you are creating a custom palette and if you embed it in the workbook, if you want to disseminate that, it will be incorporated here in this preference. In this same place, we can also add these new preferences, close, save, go back to Tableau, open it again, and now when we go to the dashboard with the map, and we click here, now the feature change. Why do we want to do this? Well, I personally, because I can. But and with going on with this data set, we need to be aware of what are we trying to communicate and who are we trying to communicate with. If you are communicating something, if you are presenting this to a board meeting, you expect the people there to interact with your visualization, maybe in a big screen or in your desktop. But if you are sending something to Twitter, for instance, you need to, if you try to interact with this in Twitter on your mobile phone, it's going to be a pain. But Tableau has the option of having different layouts. Just go here, layout, select your whatever tablet, add to layout, and now you can just modify this one as you see fit, and it's done. In this case, for instance, I have one for the phone, and whenever people are using the phone interact with like this, we see it like this. The added bonus of that is if you like blogging and you have some restrictions on what you can blog or how can you post, when you have selected a layout that is narrower, it will look great when you if you embed that into into the blog post, it would look okay, just as you design. And this is how this one would look like. If instead of doing this mobile phone layout, I have kept the original layout, this is the result when you embed it here. So it's all cut, scrim, and you need to go through you need to use the scrolling bars, and it's kind of messy. But it's another bonus of having a phone layout. It takes you 2 minutes, and it's already there. And my final tip, or it's more than a tip, is kind of an explanation. And I don't really like when I add filters and I have null values. And I think you're just going to explain later a different way of cleaning that. But I wanted to understand why are those null values there. And so when I'm comparing here, I have this data set with basically column 1, just some random numbers and some blanks. And now we evaluate how the different formulas work. So I am testing right now if those columns are equal to 1. And there are different ways of testing. One is very, very convenient. You very lazy. You just take that, type that, and it's very. You don't need to add if, ends. And when you compute that, you have true, false, whenever it's true or false. But sometimes Tableau doesn't know how to evaluate that function because there are missing values. And in that case, it will get you nulls. Similar thing, but a different thing is if you write if condition then true and then you finish, you get basically two results. Either the condition is true or then it's null for everything, whether it's false or whether there are missing values. And I am a true believer in that errors should never pass silently. So I'd rather catch them. But if you don't want to do that, you can try to use the different if conditions. If you, to the if condition, then add the else, then everything will be false, whether it's false or it's not. And if you want to change how those nulls behave, you have a few other options. One is the else if condition. So if the condition is true, then true. If it is false, it's false. And else, those would be your nulls. Keep it you can modify here instead. In this case, the reason that this is important is when you add the filters. Here is what you will see when you have the different filters. And in the first condition, we have all null, false or true. If you try to if you want to silence the nulls, you will get true or false. And if you have a different grouping, if you are assigning a true, false, whatever you are deciding to assign to the nulls, that will be the last case. Alternatively, you can do that with a set. And whatever you decide to use, it must be thinking about the downstream applications that you're going to use this for. So you later are going to count rows. It's not the same thing to count trues, false, or nulls. And ideally, but that's for another post, is you also have the option of using instead of the if function, the if function. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's for another thing. So that's all. Any questions?
Let's see if we've got any more comments. No. Okay, next up is Steph.
So my first tip is actually the last one I wrote, and it's about the difference between date parts and date trunks. So when you right click and drag a date field into your view, you get this box. And basically, when you select one, what Tableau is doing is creating a calculation. And depending on which one you click, it creates different calculations. So the thing to note about this box is the ones in this section just here, all these are blue. And the ones down here, they're all green. And all of us in the room know about blue and green, and there's loads of blogs and stuff on it, so I'm not going to go into that in detail. But essentially, the difference is blue is discrete and green is continuous. And that simply is the difference between date part and date trunk. So if I click on the blue discrete month order date version at the top and bring that in, and I'll create a calculated field. And this is actually just put my second tip in here, but if you click and drag this in, it saves you having to type calculations. So if you're a bit lazy, you can put stuff in and like drag stuff around. So month order date, when it's blue, when you drag it in, it gives you a date part calculation. If I change this to month, the continuous version, so the fill's now green, if I drag that in, it's calculating a date trunk. So that's essentially the difference between them. So date part is blue and it's discrete, and date trunk is green and it's continuous. So if I talk a bit about what the calculations are actually doing, so date part creates a integer for the bit of the date that you've selected. So here, for month, it will give you an integer like between 1 and 12. And if you'd selected year, it would give you 2013, 2014, 2015, etc. Whereas date trunk, it will give you the first date of the selection that you've picked. So here for month, it will give you the first of every month and year combination in your data. And for year, it would give you the 1st of January of the years in your data. And yeah, that's the difference between the two of them. So if I move on to my next tip, I drag sales into rows. So this one is just a really quick one, really quick shortcut. So if you hold Control and the arrows, you can resize your chart basically. So yes, that tip, really quick one. So this kind of is a follow-on point from Elliot's about using parameters to change the metric in your view. So at the moment I've just got sales, but if I want to show a few metrics on here, in a similar way that Elliot created the different things in the map, I can drag this calculation and parameter created in the same way that Elliot created his. But if you look at the axis on the left, when I change, it's not changing the title, it's just saying select a measure, which isn't useful really. So you can create a dynamic title. So I'll create it the way that I originally did it, but actually I've heard of a different way. So there's two ways to do this that I know. There's probably loads. There's usually loads of ways to do things in Tableau. If I just double click on everything, I'll just select sales. So I've got something in my view, and if I drag my parameter onto my label and take off that measure, what I've got here is just the text of the parameter that I want in my title. And I can reformat this. And then if I create a dashboard, I can drag those two sheets, the ones I've just been working on, and resize this, hide the title, edit the axis and take the title off. So now, when I change this, my dummy title on the left will change as well. So I'm kind of overcomplicating it here. So when I was talking to Mike earlier about how I was going to do this, he showed me a different way. So so I've got my parameter, and if I create a calculated field, call it label, and just put my parameter in there, what I can do is try and find it, search bit. If I drag that in to the left, it will bring it in here. So I can reformat it, so it doesn't look great like that. But you can play around with the format, and in the same way, it will change. So yeah, slightly quicker, better way of doing the same thing. So my last tip is an Alteryx one, and it's around personalization and tidying up of the canvas. So you can change the way your canvas looks by going to options, user settings, edit, edit user settings. If you go to the canvas tab, you can do a lot of different things, like change the background color. So at the moment it's white, which some people find quite difficult to read or start with white background. So you can change the background color to anything you want, if there's a color that's easier for you to read. You can add grid lines if you like to line stuff up manually and help you out a little bit, keep it a bit neater. You can do a lot of stuff in here. This one is you can change the design of your lines. There's a few different options. I personally like the automatic curly one. Yeah, so there's a lot of options in there to make it a bit easier for you to work out what's going on in your workflow, make it clearer for you. At the moment, so when you drag loads of tools in, you can get a bit messy if you don't like to line stuff up manually yourself. But you can highlight the tools you want. And if I want these in a nice straight line, because they all just lead one straight onto the other, you can do Control-Shift and minus, and it will just put them in a straight line. And then if I highlight these, Control-Shift plus, will put them in a vertical line. And it just neatens it up, makes it a lot clearer. And that's my big final tip.
Nice one. Next up's Joe.
Marcus says he's not getting any sound. The other tips seem to be there. You taught Amanda a couple of tips. No. She didn't know the control arrows or the.
Okay, for those of you that don't know me or who's listening, my name is Joe, and we are going to go through a range of different tips today. The first one, I'm sure some of you may have seen on Devs on Stage at the Tableau conference if you watched that session, but we're going to look at Viz and tooltips. I've been waiting for this for a very, very long time, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. I cannot wait until 10.5 gets released and we can start putting this stuff on Tableau Public. So why are Viz and tooltips so amazing? So here we have each customer throughout the data set, and we want to look at what products this customer has purchased. If I hover over Mr. Lonsdale here, you can see that he's obviously bought a number of different products, and therefore we get an asterisk. Before 10.5, Tableau was not able to deal with multiple lists and tooltips. However, now they can. So I have got here the top 10, I think maybe, or top 6, 7 products that Mr. Lonsdale has bought, and why not have added a cheeky little line chart in at the bottom, just showing his profit over time as well. Now, as amazing and as mind-blowing as that is, just strap yourself in because it's about to get a lot better. You'll notice I've got a little dimension, parameter at the side here. So we've seen product name. Can we see category, please? Yes, we can. It changes it in the tooltip as well. And we can also look at subcategory there as well if we really wanted to. There we go. Excellent. So, brilliant. Love those. That's the best it's going to get from me, unfortunately, today. Yeah. It's about to get a bit more technical. So let's look at table calculations, everyone's best friends after Viz and tooltips. So we have the sum of sales against the order dates by category and ship mode. But what I really want to look at is for each month and category, what are my sales by ship mode? So if I go down and I want it to be a round sum as well, I'll add a quick table calculation in for running total. and we can see the running total from different things here. But what is this really saying to us? So if we open our edit table calculation, and this is how we read these. This is the first lesson of how to talk Tablish. So if we have an unchecked box, what we want to say is that is for each. Sorry, if we have a so for each category and ship mode, give me the running sum by month of order date. But really, what we want to say is for each category and ship and month of order date, give me the running total for ship mode. So if it's unticked, sorry, yeah, if it's unticked, so for each ship mode, calculate the running sum by month of order date and category. So that's how you read table calculations. Why you would do that, I don't know, but it's just thought it'd be a great way to illustrate that. Now next, we're going to be looking at level of detail calculations and how we read them and translate them from Tablish into English. So what we have here is we have our sales by subcategory, category and subcategory. And what we want to do is we want to compare or calculate the percentage from our subcategories over the entirety of categories. Now, I am very well aware that you could easily do this as a table calculation, but as we're looking at LODs, let's do that. So I have a calculated field here with my level of detail, and this is how we read the level of detail calculations. So where we see fixed, that's where we say for each. The field, which is category, so for each category, at the colon, we say give me, and what is it giving us? The sum of sales. So for each category, give me the sum of sales. Seems pretty easy, right? So let's get our measure values in here. Let's get rid of that, rid of that, rid of that, rid of that. And for some reason, that's not working. Is there a reason that's not working?
What are you trying to say?
So I'm trying to get this one to have, each one here should be the sum of sales for furniture.
You have them in the tooltip, but you don't have it in the text.
Okay.
Yeah, drag it off and
Right,
go back and drag it into the table itself.
There we go. There we go. That's what it should look like. Excellent. Okay, the calculation was right, just not my marks card. And then what you can do from here is you can create a calculated field saying sales over your level of detail sales, and then you would work out your percentage. So that's one way to do it. Again, you probably do it using a table calculation. This is another thing that I created, although just to kind of illustrate it to you. So I've got for each state, give me the sum of profit, and I want to work out what each state contributes to the whole country's profit, and then you can work that out using the calculation shown at the bottom, and then that goes on to the map. Okay, next, context filters. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got a top end category, top end filter on subcategory, and I've split that out by different categories as well, which I can filter on. Now, if I want to say, I think it's a top five filter. So if I want to look at office supplies, I would expect to see the top 5 office supplies available. But oh no, it doesn't work. What's happening? So what's happening here is Tableau is doing the top 5 filter first. So what we want to do is we want it to do the category filter first to then give us the top 5. So what we can do is we can add that to context. And if we look at office supplies again, then we can see that we now have the top 5. There it is. So table calculations, level of detail calculations, and context filters, what does it all mean? Well, there's this special thing called the order of operations. And this is effectively the order at which Tableau will perform the things that you tell it to. So at the top we've got extract and data source filters. These are fairly similar. The way I like to think about them are, if you've filtered them at the extract or the data source level, then they're not going to appear in your view, and there's nothing you can do in Tableau with them. Context filters, as we just discovered, they come next. Then we have dimension and measure filters, which is your blue and your green pills, as we covered, as someone else covered earlier. And then your table calcs, which we've just covered as well. Now, we've also got fixed, include and exclude. These are both different kinds of level of detail calculations, and they fit into the diagram, as you can see there. So very important to remember these. The other thing about context filters as well is you can see that the pill turns grey when it's in context. And the other thing as well, Tableau kind of gives you a visual cue on this. So as I turn this back to, you'll see the pills at the bottom, and as I put it back into context, you see it jumps to the top, which I think is really useful because you can see that category filter is then happening before your subcategory top 5 filter. Okay, final tip. So this week in Data School we had Dan Rains in, who did us a bit of a talk and kind of how he felt about Tableau. And the most surprising thing that I took away from that was that he doesn't like dashboards, which is a very rare thing in the Data School, and probably the Information Lab as well, to be honest. So from what I took from that, I think it's a really good point, was that he says every time he sees a dashboard, he says, so what? So what? I don't care, it's a dashboard, whatever, so what? And I think as dashboard developers, we should be thinking like that as well. When we create something, we should be questioning it. What is this showing our user? Are we showing it in the best way? You can fill your dashboard with fancy charts, fancy level of detail calculations, but at the end of the day, if it's not easy for your user to use and understand, there's not really much point in doing it. And as the developer, the responsibility for the ease of use for the user lies on us. So here's my #1 tip for making it easier for the user, and it's what we start, and what you start with is what your user starts with, and that's your title. So if we look at this dashboard, which is on a couple of weeks ago for Makeover Monday, the title of this is American Obesity Analysis. Okay, that's pretty cool, yeah. I suppose I could have a play around and see if there's something in there that's interesting. Or I can change the title into a question. And as soon as you change the title into a question, it immediately gets your user's mind working, saying, how does obesity levels in individual states compare with the US average? Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe there's a state you have a particular interest in. Maybe you're going to visit a state soon. Maybe you live in a state. So you can then select a state from wherever it is that you want to look at. So District of Columbia. And we can then see that this highlight at the bottom. And then you start to get your user following that story through the dashboard that you're trying to tell them. So #1 tip for really creating a story and getting your users' mind engaged with your dashboard is make the title a question. That's it.
Nice one. Pick some of the trickier areas of Tableau there to tackle.
In 5 minutes.
Okay, next up is Georgia.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, I'm Georgia. Here are my 5 tips of the week. My first tip is about sorting and nested sorting. If you want to sort your category by sales, by region, you can do it in different ways, but this is definitely the quickest way. You just duplicate your sales here and you put a minus, and then you change it to discrete, put it in the middle, and here it's sorted, and then you can just, no. This is my first tip. My second tip is about parameter. So there are two different ways to create your parameter. The first one is just clicking here, and then you can click here, and then take a list, and then from a list you can choose whichever parameter you want, or a quicker way, which I didn't know, but maybe it's very obvious. You right-click on subcategory, and you create parameter, and it gives you the title already, and you have all of your parameters already listed, all of your items already listed. So you create your new parameter, and you show it. Then maybe you just want to highlight one parameter, like one item that you selected from your parameter. So you have to create a calculated field, which you can call highlight category, and then you put your parameter. And you just put it on color, and you have then you put true on the top, and then you have your parameter highlighted. Is my third tip. My first tip is on filtering. When this represents all the restaurants with 5 stars in London, but if you just select one borough, you still have all the list of the bars that you have in London. So if you just want to look at the business that are in Camden, you click here, and you just show only relevant value, and here you just have the bars that you have in Camden. You can just do this with filters and not with parameters. Last tip is about the null, as David mentioned before. So as you can see in my map, I have some nulls that I don't want them. So you edit your filter and you eliminate the null. But so we don't have any null anymore. But then if you then click on all, the null is back again. So one way to get rid of this is to create a set. So you can just go. You have to duplicate your measure first, because it's a measure and it's not a dimension, so you cannot create a set. And duplicate it and you drag it, and then you create a set, and you include them all apart from the null, and you go. And then you just drag it here on the filter, you get rid of this. And here you have your filter without the nulls. This was my 5th tip, and that's it. Thank you.
George, your turn.
See me? Yes, cool. All right, so my first tip is about the pause button. So when you're dealing with a really, really large data set, so this is the prescription data in the UK from the Excel database, so we've got like 824 million rows. if you try and do something like quite big, a big calculation, so say, for example, let's see all the chemicals that are prescribed, and then let's take an instance of it, and let's, I don't know, try and see how they're done across the primary care trusts. Tableau's not really going to like you doing this. It's going to take a very, very long time to calculate it. Let's cancel that. So you don't want to do that every time, especially if you're experimenting, dragging pills all over the place. You probably only want to let it calculate when you've done the entirety of your view. So if you click the pause button up here in the top left, Tableau won't calculate the view until you unpause it. So we can drag our silly query, so all the chemicals by PCT, and let's see how much it costs. I'm not actually going to let this run because it will take ages, but that's not actually going to work. Yeah, so put the text on there. So this would give us a table about all those costs. I'm not going to run it, it'll take forever. So that's my first tip. So that's a quick one. My second tip is going to be, how do we build something? So that was 10.4, because 10.5 is going to be faster and you won't have to do it at all, I'm sure. So this is what I made earlier. So this is a lovely little sparkline graph with a dot at the end to tell you some information. In this case, it's the profit ratio. These dots at the end, they're very useful because the sparkline only gives you so much information. It's nice to have that extra bit on top. Doesn't add too much complexity to the view, but gives a lot of extra information. So you've already built your lovely little sparkline, just a line graph over time. It's sales. To build the dot at the end, we're first going to need to only display the very last value of the thing. And we do this with this equation down here that I prepared earlier. So we make a little calculated field. So let's call this last sales. So what this is doing basically is, if last equals 0, so last is a table calculation that essentially counts backwards from the end of the graph. So this one over here would be 0, this one over here would be lots and lots. The opposite is the first calculation, and that, if I use that, we'll put a dot at this end. So if it's last, return the sum of sales. So this sort of thing, I then drag it, last sales, and then drag it onto our bar. So we've now got a lovely little dot on secondary axis. So let's put it onto dual axis. Let's synchronize axes by doing this over here, and this over here. There we go. So now we've got the dot on the end. Wait. And now let's put on what we're interested in. So instead of measure names, let's have profit ratio. So now we've got colors, not very big. Let's make it larger. So now we've got a lovely little sparklines with the dot on the end. And to finish this off and tidy up, let's hide this axis. Lovely. Very nice, very nice. So that was tip 2. Tip 3, 4, and 5 are kind of linked because I kind of wanted to take someone through making something, and then I realized that I split it up in 3 different blocks instead of 1 block. So you're going to take you through a process. This process starts with this lovely little graph I found on Fox. So this graph is it's a bump chart, which is what I'm going to show you how to make, of state population in the US over time. So it tells some interesting stories, things like, for example, California is obviously now the most populous state ever. Texas is very good. Lots of things changing up and down. However, if we just look at population, we'll be able to see some of the major messages, like California, for example, but we might miss some of the smaller ones, like what are these guys down here doing? Like we've seen, for example, that Arizona's gone from very low down to up here. But when I show you something, when I show you actually how to make thing, we'll see that Arizona's population is in a whole bunch of other states. We can't really see it separately. That's why you might use a bump chart measurements. So, Box very kindly have the data here, which I have downloaded. And I'm now going to try and bring it into Tableau. So let me open a new window. While it takes its time. And then let's drag the state population into Tableau. Now, the first thing you're going to see is this data is not in a good format for Tableau. If we have a look here, we have all these dimensions, which is not what we want at all. So my first tip is going to be how do you prepare this data in Tableau so that we can actually use it to calculate what we want. So if we go back to data source, the main bit of this tip is about how do you pivot data. So we've got all this stuff in a horrible place. So let's select all these columns that we don't want to be columns. And then we right click, or you can click caret and click pivot. And now Tableau magically turns these into just a nice thin column, which is brilliant. So this is getting us there. It's not quite where we want to be because we've got all these ranks, which I guess we could use, but actually I'm going to calculate those later. So let's get rid of those. First thing, yeah, let's do that. So to do that, we just add a filter. Lovely data source filter. So add that. So let's use pivot field names. We're going to change that in a second. And let's search rank. And so let's just select everything that's rank. So Mike's actually going to show you this because I learned it off him in a second, but that's a lovely tip. So then we pick that. As you want to exclude them. So yeah. Goodbye rank. So much better. But we've got the word population here. We don't need that. We just want the year name. Let's split the column up. This is a really simple split for Tableau. You can do a custom split if your data's a bit messier. It's going to see the space, know that's where I want to split it, and do it. Brilliant. So we've now got, this data is looking pretty good. Final thing, pivot field names, not particularly descriptive. Let's rename the column here to year. Let's rename this to population. And you can see that currently the data type is this little ABC on top left. We know that's a number. Let's tell Tableau it is already. And same with the year. Let's tell it. Great. So now, that's the end of the data formatting bit. This is now in a good place for us to use it. Great. So now on to actually making it. So let's put year on there, and let's put, so population thinks it's a dimension. It's not. Give up to measure, put there. Now let's put state on column detail and turn it into a line graph. Lovely. So this is a nice chart. You can see California's population has increased a lot. You can see we've got Texas, New York, Florida. There's some stories there we can already tell. But again, we've got this huge, massive states down here. We don't really know what's going on. We don't know if like Arizona's going above Arkansas. We don't know what's going on. Let's make a lovely bar chart. Now to do this, we make some table calculations. As Joe told us earlier, there's some bit of grammar when it comes to table calculations. So what I did there was I just set it as a rank on the quick table calculation, but we want it not for each state, but for each year by state. And so we've now got a lovely little bar chart, but the axis is in the wrong direction. We want number 1 to be at the top. Nice and easy. So format, edit the axis, reverse it, and voila, California is at the top of the list. Now, my third tip was going to be a complete thing of how to format this all the way to where the box chart looks like. But I learned something along the way that I thought was so cool, and I didn't know how to do it. I say so cool from like a Tableau perspective. I enjoyed it. That I thought it should be its own tip or so. So that's what I'm going to give you now. I want this thing, this axis along the bottom, on the top. I didn't know how to do this in Tableau until literally the other day when I Googled it. So you try dragging out there, you're like, please do this. Nah. Instead, what you need to do is click Analysis, Table Layout, Advanced, and then uncheck this box that says Show Innermost Level at Bottom of View when there is a vertical axis. Untick, press OK. Magically, it's at the top. This was a big deal when I found out, but it's a little sad now that that's it. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to probably write a blog at some point next week about how to actually take this all the way to the box chart, but for now, that's where I'll leave it. Thank you very much.
I think it's really good because I know that they came out with that feature more recently, But I had started using Tableau before it came out, so I'm just so in the habit of just like, okay, we're gonna duplicate this.
It's quite nice that they've given it such a catchy name as well. It should, move access to the top would be great.
Put it like right in the middle of the nested.
Yeah, it's really clear how to get that.
Yeah.
Is this someone's mouse? Oh, that's my mouse.
Yeah, I might end up moving your screen instead of mine.
Okay, next up's Jeremy.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I've got 5 tips for you today. The first one will be a little shortcut. The second, third, and fourth ones will be about date and time. And the fifth one will be a bit of formatting to finish off. So tip number 1 is a really quick one, which for me was a bit of a lifesaver. I think it's great. I've got one measure in the view here, profit, and I've got segments. And I want to label each bar by the sum of profit because I can kind of see where they are against the numbers and the actors, but I want to know exactly where they are. There's a little T button here in the toolbar at the top. Just click on that. You've got your labels. Tip 1 done. Okay. Tip 2. So this is a little more tricky. This is the first one I've got about dates and times. This one is, suppose you want to have a graph of, in this case, sales over time. But what you want to do is you want your user to be able to flip between different kinds of date. So these can see it by year, or they can see it by month, or they can see it by day. Make it really easy for them. So what we do here is we have 3 main steps. Firstly, we need a parameter for the user to be able to choose what kind of date they have. So what I've done here, I've not actually created, I've created a little parameter here called select date type. I've made it a string. I've allowed it to be a list. And now I have to manually enter in the values that I want these to be able to select from. Lowercase, no exclamation speech marks, day, month, year. Like so. And display as, I'm just going to allow them to select days or months. That says months rather than months, which is not what I want to select. Months and years. Like so. That's step 1 of this. Now step 2, what I want to have is I want a date field in the view. So I want the date field on columns. But I want that date to be able to change when the parameter changes. So when the parameter says day, it needs to be days, and so on, my months and years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calculated field with my order date, which is the date with the date I'm using. Here I've called it, I've got in big capital letters so I knew which one to select. So what it needs to be, as Steph pointed out earlier, you have date trunk for continuous. And I want it to be continuous because I want a line graph. So here I'm going to put in date trunk. And then I need my date part, and then I need the date field I'm using. So the date part will be what the parameter will change, day, month, or year. So there I'm just going to enter whatever I call my parameter, which is select date type. I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to put my date field in the second half. And OK that. So what we've got is we've got a calculated field, which will take the date type as selected by the parameter, and then we'll take the order date. So that's part 2 of the 3 parts we need to do this one. Now I drag that to columns and it won't work. So it sort of worked because it's got days, but what we need to do is the third bit, because it's currently set on year, years, even though the parameter is showing days. The third bit is to select exact date. That won't take the exact part of the parameter as we selected. So exact date, now it's days. And you can see in the top right-hand corner, you can select between days, months, or years, and so on. So that's tip 2. Tip 3. This is a problem I had earlier this week that I wanted to share with you. So Tableau has a very strict hierarchy for dates and times. It has a year at the top, then below that is month, and it goes all the way down to minute and second. Now, I was getting data into Tableau which had just time in it as a string and date in it as a string. And what I wanted to do is I wanted the date time field. So this is what I did after much Googling. My time string here is called time string and so on. And you can see my time is in this format where I've got hours and then minutes and then seconds with colons between them. Quite a common way of showing time. So what I want to do is combine that with the date, which the date will convert straight to a date in Tableau by changing the data type, but the time won't convert straight to a time and won't go on straight as it should. So the first thing I do is I take my string, and I realize it's hours, minutes, and seconds. So I'm going to split it into hours and minutes and seconds. So the first thing I did was go down to transform, custom split, and split it into those 3 parts. So I'm going to use the columns delimiter, and I select first 3 columns down there. Now I've already done this, and I've labeled them as hour, minute, and second as the fields. The second thing you need to do is each of those needs to be a whole number, because the next function to put this together into a time will only deal with integers. So you go to change data type and you go to number whole. Now part 3 of this is making those hours, minutes, and seconds either into a time. So you need a function that will combine those 3 things into a time. So the function here is make time. And you create calculator field, you make time, and then you want your field for hour, field for minute, field for second, which I've handily labeled hour, minute, and hopefully second. And then we close that. And that makes them all into a time. Now to combine them into the date time field, which is what Tableau will read, we need to combine date and time. So the function here is another create calculator field. This time, again, Tableau has actually called it a very sensible name, which is make date time. Really helpfully, actually. I mean, it's not obvious until you've tried it, but so you want your date string first, and you want your time integer second. So I've got date string, which is the date field, and I've got, what do they call it, make time, didn't I? So that should be date and time. I've got an extra bracket, okay. Date and time. And now let's go and add that to the so that's currently year, and I can make it go further into months and days I want, and quarter. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is, with the same data, imagine this is coming through into Tableau, and it's not, as the previous one was, kind of the time of day. That was saying sort of quarter past 8 or whatever. Imagine this time that these are sort of race times or something. Like you run a marathon at 13 hours, 41 minutes, or rather you've walked some of the marathon, you've gone to the pub a couple of times, and then you walk the rest of it, which sounds more sensible in my opinion. So Tableau, if you're going to use that as a measure, using the different, the amount of time someone's taken and comparing them against one another, you need to convert this time string into a measure rather than going up with the date. So what I've done here, what I do here is I create a calculated field. Let's call it total time. And the first thing you need to do is you have the hour, minute, second part. So as in the previous example, I split the field out into hours, minutes, and seconds as whole numbers, as we've just seen. And the only way of doing this is to add them together, essentially. So into the smallest possible measure, which in this case is seconds. So I take the hour, an hour is 3,600 seconds. So I multiply that by 3,600. I add the number of minutes in seconds, which is a minute and 60 seconds. So I times that by 60, and then I just add the seconds. And that will give me my total time. And if we add that to the view, we will get each of those in terms of the total time as a measure. That is number 4. And now number 5 is something that I always have problems with. I always forget how to do this. And so doing it as a tip this week was a great way of actually reminding myself, maybe permanently teaching myself how to do it. Here are a lot of borders. There are borders everywhere. There's a lot of lines on our chart. We don't want them. Of course we don't want them. How do we get rid of them? Pretty simple. Right-click on the view itself. Go to Format. And now click on the little borders tool at the top there. There are 2 things you need to do. First of all, you need to click on the borders, and you need to get rid of the row dividers. Get rid of some of them, and the column dividers. Get rid of some more. And the other place where the borders will appear is the 3 lines to the right of that. So I added obviously a load of weird reference lines to this to make it more obvious. But let's just get rid of everything. Click on each of them and click None, and they will just disappear. Let's go through all of those. Hopefully when I remove all of these, there'll be no lines left on my chart at all. Hopefully. Yeah, and there you go, they're all gone. So we had, the first tip was about the T button for labels. The second tip was about changing the date part with parameter. The third tip was about making a date time field out of a date string and a time string. The fourth part was about making time into a measure when you've just got a string that's come in. And number 5 is about getting rid of all your borders. Thank you.
Two to go. Charlie's up now.
Hi everybody, I'm Charlie. So the way that my tips are going to be ordered for the sake of this presentation is kind of the order that you want to be thinking about going through them as you're putting your visualization together. So first things first, 3 considerations for planning data visualizations. This is something that we were taught by Karen Beavan in the first week when she came to visit us. And it's basically to make you stop and think about why you're doing what you're doing before you start doing it, so that you don't have to backtrack later on once you've already committed to a terrible idea and then realize an hour's work in that you need to restart. And the 3 things that she tells you, or that she points out as important to think about, are the aim. So what's your message? What are you trying to achieve with your visualization? Your audience, who is it for? What needs might they have? And then the data. What data do you have, and how does the data that you have influence the ways that you can use it to achieve your aims for your audience? So now we've thought about what we're trying to achieve with our visualization, who it's for, and what data we have. So for the rest of this, I'm using some data in my examples that I got from the Artistic Gymnastics World Championships, which happened a couple of weeks ago in Montreal. And I got it in this horrible, horrible downloaded PDF format. So the first thing that I needed to do was take it into Alteryx, and this took a few iterations to get it right. But the tip that I want to point out is this one, which is the trim tip. So as you can see in the nationality field, there's a couple of extra letters, things that we don't need. And I found that the function for it is the trim function, which you can see in the left-hand corner of this configuration window. And the format for this function is trim, open brackets, and then the first thing that you input is the field that you want to be trimmed, and then a comma, and the second input is what you want to be trimmed from that field. So in this case, it's the nationality field that we're trying to trim, and we want to trim from the end of it the 2 superfluous letters, the D and the E. So you can see the output from this is then this nice clean nationality field, which you can use in Tableau. Moving into Tableau for the third tip. Tip number 3. This is to do with dynamic titles. So at the moment, you can see the title for this graph is what score and rank did each athlete achieve on each apparatus. It kind of, it does the job, it fulfills a function, but it can be improved on. So we have the filtering on the left-hand side. Now, whilst this filters the visualization, it doesn't filter the title. The way that we can improve on this is by double-clicking on the title field. We can highlight where it says each athlete. Then in this insert drop-down, we can choose name, because that's what we want it to show. So now, for what score and rank did name achieve on each apparatus? If we press OK, we can now see that as we change the filter, the name of the athlete that appears in the title also changes, which is quite nice because I think it allows the user a level of personalization with the visualization that just gives a little more focus to what they're seeing in their visualization. Tip number 4 is an LOD tip, which is a little bit scary, but it'll be okay. So you can do this is to do with calculating percentages of totals. Now you can do this with a table calc, and it's nice and simple, but table calcs only operate on the things that you have in the view. This is fine at the moment because we have 100% of what we're looking at in the view. But as soon as we try and apply a filter to this, we have a problem, because as we uncheck the filters, so as I uncheck, floor, high bar, and parallel bars, those things are no longer in the view, so aren't contributing to the total that we're calculating the percentage of. The most obvious way to demonstrate this is by moving it to 1. So, of course, when we only have Vault in the view, the total score for Vault is contributing 100% to the total score of Vault, which is the only thing that we have in view. Now, we can solve this by getting rid of the table calculation and using an LOD instead, because what we want to do is fix it so that the denominator of our percentage of total fractions is the overall total rather than just the total for each apparatus. So, I'm going to create a calculated field. I'll just give it a name, percentage of total LOD. Now, the way that we want to express this LOD, so the numerator is the top of the fraction, and for that, we just want the sum of the total. And then in the denominator, we need it to be a sum, because we need to be able to compare aggregates with aggregates. And then inside that, we're going to start our LOD. So you've heard about how we read LODs from Joe, I think. So the fix is what we want it to be fixed on. Now, the way I like to think about it in this case is that what I want it to fix on is the x-axis, which is going to be the name. So for each name, for each athlete, we want it to return the sum of their total. And then we close the LOD.
You got colon instead of a between the sum totals.
Oh yeah, thank you guys. I was looking at my LOD thing. There needs to be a colon. Yes, so this is all we need. Although there's other things in the view like apparatus, the LOD is fine like this because as soon as we add it into the view, the filters are going to be applied afterwards, kind of in conjunction. So we press OK, and then click and drag that in to replace the table calc. This isn't formatted as a percentage, so we can go in, we can change the default number format to a percentage. We'll leave it with 1 decimal place. And now that's displaying as a percentage. And the real test is that as we then filter out different apparatuses, the percentage of total works. That's tip number 4. Final tip is just thought I'd take a little easy one after all of that. And this is just to create a bar chart with bars within bars. So, for example, we have on here the average total scored by all athletes on each apparatus, and that the overall total is contributed to by a difficulty score and an execution score. So I want to see how much does the difficulty contribute to the overall total. So I'm going to start by dragging difficulty onto my row shelf. Now this comes in as a sum, but I don't want it to be a sum, I want it to be an average so that it matches the total. So using that drop-down menu, change it to an average. And then add it to a dual axis. What we want to do next is right-click and synchronize axes so that they're being compared by like scales. I don't want this to have total on the colour, so I'll just take that off and change it to black so that it stands out nice and clearly against the background. Then by decreasing the size, we can kind of nest the bars within the bars, so you can see them as a contribution. And then lastly, if you remove the header from this side, you can add some formatting to the main y-axis, just so that it's nice and clean and simple. And then you'd also add a little key or something so that people know that the black bars represent the difficulty average for each apparatus. That is the end of my 5 tips. Thank you.
And last but not least, it's Michael.
Haven't seen it yet.
I'm bringing you up.
I think I'm not. Okay, so my tips, well, 4 of the 5 tips are all tie in with each other, and then I've got one tip at the end that just doesn't, but I'll show that at the end. So first of all, I really wanted to show what the functionality of this, the combination of these tips might be, just as a quick bit of context. So what we did at our last company is for each dashboard that we had for each department, we had a landing page, and then on that we had a selection of dashboards. So I've created a couple here, but we had a few more than that. And then what we would use this for is to select the dashboard, and you would go through to that dashboard. Now, what we also had was another button here, which would take you back to that landing page, so that you never had to leave this view. You could just flip between the dashboards easily, and you wouldn't have to search through the tab. So if you're a user, you don't actually need that. So what I'll do is show you how I make it. So my first tip is creating or using your own image as a shape, because each of these are actually shapes rather than dashboards. So that just improves performance. So if this was a dashboard, it would be quite slow, but because it's just an image that you select, it improves the performance. So created a tab here because what we were doing is we're just creating a worksheet, which is essentially one button. You would create one for each button that you want to use. So I'm going to create a home button, and I've already found the image that I want to use. So that will be in a folder. What you need to do is go to a Tableau repository, go to shapes, which is where all the shape files are stored, and then in here, if you create a folder, that will be the title of the folder that you're using, and that will be where it will appear in Tableau, which is what I'll show you shortly. So I've already created one, which is tip week, and within here, I've saved the image that I want to use, which is my home button. So if I go back to Tableau now, first thing you want to do is create a field that your button is going to use. So for our home button, I would just do something simple like home, and in here, I would use home. So there is a slightly more complicated way of doing this, depending on the use of the button that you're using, but for this, it's just quite a simple way of getting it into the dashboard. So the reason I've selected home here, there's no real reason for it, but when if you've got lots of them and you've got rows of data, having them labelled as home or whatever the button's being used for is quite useful, because this will appear in every single row in your data now. So what you want to do is select shape on your marks type, grab the field that you just created for home, and drag it onto shape, and that will create something for you. If you make that entire view and increase the size, and then all you have to do is change the type of shape file, the shape that you're using. So when you first put your shape image into your folder, it won't initially appear. So what you need to do is select reload shapes down here, and that will update the folders where all the shapes are held. So that's just one sort of quick side tip that's not really related, but it's not one of my 5 tips, but this is something that's how you get it in there. So these are all the different folders that we saw earlier, and I'm using tip week. And in here, actually, I haven't reloaded the shapes yet. So if I select reload shapes, you'll see the home button appears, and I can now use that as a shape. And so that's what we'll be using. So that's my first tip, which is how to put your own custom image into your dashboard, and that can be used for all sorts of things, which I suppose is another dashboard another tip I can do another time. So what we want to do is go to the dashboard where we want the shape to go, and we want to drag that in wherever we want that to be. So in this case, I want it in the top right corner. I want to hide the title, and I just want to shape it or size it. So now we've got a button there, but it doesn't actually work or do anything at the moment. So what you need to do is create a dashboard action.
And this includes another one of my tips, which George kind of previewed earlier, which is something that I picked up through someone I used to work with, and it just saves a lot of time. So rather than having to tick all these individual boxes, you can just click here and drag, and that will select multiple boxes, and then everything that's selected you can untick. You can also control click if you need to. So if you want to select sort of in between, you can use that as well. So for creating the button, you need to select the sheet that you want to action upon. So you've got the home button there, and you want it to be a select. And then for your target sheet, what you want to do is find the sheet that you want to go to. So in this case, landing page. But you don't want it to actually action on any of the images or any of the data on that page. So you just unselect these boxes. So what it'll attempt to do is go to that and then filter, but it's filtering on nothing. So it's just the way to navigate. Leave everything else, so show all values or fields. Click OK. And now when you select that, it should take you back to your first page. My fourth tip, so first tip being creating the image, second tip being the quick select of the boxes, third tip is to use that to navigate between pages. My fourth tip is if you want to select this, now that you've got an action on it, when you click it, it will take you through to another dashboard. And so if you actually want to be able to select that and not have it action anything, you can use the middle click on your mouse or the scrolly bar, and that will select that without actually actioning it and dragging you through to another page. And you can use that on anything. So if you wanted to select this, I know a lot of people select like their dashboard and they'll do that and then they'll have to do another click to take it off. If you just use your middle click, it will select the box that it's in. And in addition to that, if you have anything in containers and you want to select the container something's in, you can double click on here and that will show you what container that's in, and that goes all the way up. So if that's in a container, you double click that. If that's in a container, you can double click that, and so on.
Was that only in 10.5?
No, this is 10.4. And it was in 10.3 as well when I was using it, and I don't know prior to that. And then my last tip, which isn't related to this, but it's just another time-saving thing, is if you have lots of measures and you want to bring them all into the view, so a lot of people know that you can just control and select measures down here. And if you wanted to bring them all into the view, you've got them all there as average, sum, aggregate, sum, sum. If you want them all to be sums, or you want them all to be averages, or you want them to all be the same aggregate, I guess, you can control click the pills up here and just click the drop down on one of them. And it's not working for that some reason. That one.
You might be able to do it when they're in measures.
No, you can do it there as well. It's just I think I had something in there that couldn't be aggregated in a different way. So you've got sum, 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 and average. So if I wanted to change that to median, that'll change to medians. I'm not sure why you want to do that in this case, but I use that something that is useful for is if you use your measure values in a table, for example, and you've got all the different measure values, and say you've got 10 different things that you're recording in a table, and they're all different, and you want them all to be sums, or you want half of them to be average and half of them to be sums, you can select half of them and do it all at the same time rather than having to go into each individual drop down and changing them one by one. And that's it, my 5 tips.
Well done, guys. Anyone have any comments or? No?
Good, yeah.
Excellent. Good stuff.
What's the favourite one?
That innermost axis thing is good. The alternative is the dual axis.
Yeah.
And also, I like to see the select tool. It's probably my favourite tool. Yeah. If you run a database, you need to be very strict on types and select.
Cool. Right, I'm going to kill the meeting. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Beautiful.